The world slammed sideways. Cade Varen barely registered the violent jolt before the hull around him tore open. The emergency restraint snapped. He was airborne for a heartbeat, then the storm took him, an avalanche of freezing wind and static tearing him from the ruptured rescue pod and hurling him into the pale, endless void. The blizzard howled like a living thing. Sheets of crystalline snow slashed across his visor, each impact a sharp metallic ping in his ears. His HUD, once a clean display of life support and coordinates, now spasmed with jagged lines and bursts of static. The storm was electromagnetic, his onboard sensors frying in the overload. Something moved out there. Through the shifting haze, a colossal shadow crossed his vision, moving with a slow, deliberate weight. The ground beneath him trembled, as though the frozen crust of the planet were nothing more than fragile glass. A towering ice column, meters thick, shattered as the shadow passed, sending deadly shards spinning through the air. One chunk the size of a spear slammed into his helmet, grazing just enough to leave a hairline fracture right in his line of sight. His breath hitched. If that crack deepened, the storm would claim him in seconds. Core temperature dropping, the voice of Saren, his helmet's AI, announced in its neutral, unfeeling tone. Estimated time to hypothermia onset, 3 minutes. Cade forced himself upright against the wind, each movement a battle. He reached down to unclip his shock rifle, but the moment his gloved finger found the trigger, the weapon refused to respond. The battery indicator blinked a dead red. The storm's M field had killed it. He swore under his breath, voice muffled in the sealed helmet. The planet Navarros had been marked on ancient star maps as inhospitable, a frozen hell without even microbial life. The storm itself should have been enough to prove the point. And yet something lived here. The ground gave way beneath his left foot. He slid, boots scraping at the icy slope, until gravity seized him fully. Cade dropped, spinning, the beam from his helmet casting fractured light across jagged walls of ice as he fell into the Earth's frozen gut. He hit hard, pain blooming in his side, the impact shoving the breath from his lungs. He rolled onto his back, teeth clenched, and looked up. The storm above was a swirling, pale cyclone through the ragged hole he'd just fallen through. And then 2 points of impossible green light appeared at the edge. Eyes, they were the size of his helmet, glowing faintly, cutting through the storm. Fixed directly on him, not the scanning gaze of a curious animal, this was focus. Recognition, a hunter marking its prey. Cade froze, every instinct screaming for stillness. Though his pulse pounded loud enough to drown out the storm, the creature didn't move closer. Didn't retreat. It simply watched for what felt like a lifetime, then vanished, the glow swallowed by the blizzard. His breath came fast, each exhale fogging the inside of his visor. The rational choice would be to head in the opposite direction, put as much ice between him and those eyes as possible. But rationality had no place here. If that thing survived in this storm, it knew the terrain, and likely where there was shelter. If he chose wrong, the cold would gut him before the creature even had to try. He pushed himself to his feet, the wind in the open pit above clawing at him like invisible hands. Snow crumbled at the edges. He found the impact point where the creature's weight had pressed into the surface. Impression deep enough to split the ice. Cade crouched, gloved fingers brushing the fractured edge. It wasn't just a footprint. It was heat-scorched, the frost melted to smooth glass. "Saren," he said, his voice low, his breath short, "track the thermal residual from this mark." "Set heading." "Warning," the AI replied, "no clear mapping data for this sector. The target may be hostile." "It is *hostile," Cade said, scanning the shadows around the hole. "That's the point." The AI hesitated as much as an algorithm could, then gave him a bearing. Cade pulled himself out of the pit. using his ice hooks to anchor each move against the screaming wind. The crack in his visor expanded by a millimeter with each impact of flying debris. At the surface again, the world was a wall of white, the creature's trail, those enormous, scorched impressions, led into a bank of fog so thick it seemed solid. Each step was a wager. Either he followed death or he froze where he stood. As he moved, his mind refused to stay silent. The image of those eyes burned into him, dredging up a memory he'd buried deep. Another world, another storm. Another set of alien eyes staring at him from the dark before the rest of his unit vanished. He clenched his jaw. He'd sworn never to run again. The trail curved, weaving between jagged ice formations like petrified waves. The wind carried a sound now, something beneath its constant howl, a deep, steady pulse, as if the ice itself had a heartbeat. It matched his pace, distant but following. Thermal reading increasing, Saren said. Target is slowing. Cade tightened his grip on his ice hook. He could almost feel it now, not through sensors, but in his bones, the way predators feel each other across a kill zone. The wind shifted, and for a fraction of a second the fog parted. The silhouette ahead was vast, crouched, with armor like plates across its back. Steam vented from the gaps, crystallizing instantly into drifting shards. It didn't flee, it didn't charge. It simply turned its head toward him, as though inviting him to close the distance. A shiver slid down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He took a step forward, the ice groaning beneath him. And somewhere deep inside, a voice, his own or the memory of someone long gone, asked, "If this is the path back, Cade, are you ready to fight what waits at the end?" He didn't answer. He just kept walking. The storm hadn't relented since the moment Cade Varen hit the surface. But the cold didn't bite as deep as the weight of his past. Every step he took crunched against the crust of ancient ice. His breath rasping in the helmet, as his eyes scanned the endless white for movement. Somewhere ahead, the trail of scorched impressions cut a path into the blizzard. He didn't just follow it. He stalked it, as if each footprint might be the answer to a question that had gnawed at him for years. Cade Varen, former Interstellar Special Operations, dishonorably discharged, court-martialed in absentia, and branded a traitor by the only people he'd ever fought to protect. His crime, surviving. On Vraxos, his squad had vanished into the screaming dark, and when rescue finally came, he was the only one left. No bodies, no black box, just him and a story no one believed. The whispers had followed him everywhere: murderer, coward, spy, and so had the looks, the ones that said you should have died with them. The truth was a wound he couldn't close. This mission was more than an assignment. It was his last battlefield. Somewhere on this frozen planet was the rumored portal, an ancient rift that could lead to Earth's lost cradle civilization. If he could find it, bring back proof. Maybe he could return not as the ghost of a condemned soldier, but as something more. And if along the way he found out who, or what, had truly taken his squad, he'd finally have the justice, or vengeance, he'd been chasing in every sleepless night. The snow swirled in erratic bursts, masking the horizon. Cade slowed, closing his eyes behind the visor. His other sense, the one they'd called unnatural, spread outward. He could feel vibrations in the ice, subtle ripples of life's electric hum, like the low drumbeat of hidden hearts. On good days, he could pinpoint the presence of a living being a kilometer away. On bad days, it blurred into a haze of noise. And on Navarro's, during a magnetic storm like this, it was chaos. The signals bent, split, sometimes bouncing back as if 100 things were moving at once, sometimes vanishing entirely. It was like trying to listen to a single voice in a hurricane, but there was something out there, something huge. Its presence came and went in pulses, never still long enough for him to lock onto it. That was wrong. No natural predator kept its rhythm that deliberately unless it wanted to be found, or wanted him to follow. He adjusted course, heading toward a jagged ridge where the footprints deepened into cracks. The ice here was unstable, spiderweb fissures spreading under the pressure of whatever had passed through. Below the surface, the faint silhouettes of massive shapes drifted, slow and ponderous. They moved with a patience that only apex predators possessed. He watched one of the shadows turn, gliding beneath the ice as if tracking him from below. The memory came like a knife in the dark, Vraxos, 5 years ago. The jungle night hot and wet, the air vibrating with unseen life. His squad had been moving in single file, weapons drawn. The sound of distant artillery shaking the leaves. Then the ground under Corporal Wren had buckled. A blur of motion, claws like blades, and the man had been torn apart before anyone could scream. In the chaos, Cade had seen its eyes, luminescent, intelligent, cold. And just like that, it had melted back into the dark. He never got to tell the others what he saw. Moments later, the storm hit and the rest were gone. The eyes he'd glimpsed in the blizzard hours ago, they were the same color. The same weight. He didn't believe in coincidence anymore. Cade, Saren's voice cut through the memory, sharp and clinical. Your heart rate is elevated beyond safe levels. Adrenaline spikes are impairing your temperature regulation. Recommend immediate shelter and mission abort until storm conditions stabilize. Not happening, he said, his voice a low growl. Your capacity for rational assessment may be compromised by unresolved psychological trauma, Saren continued. There is an 86% probability you are projecting prior experiences onto. Enough, he snapped, his boots crunching hard into the ice. If I stop now, I'm already dead. Dead here or dead out there, it makes no difference. At least this way, I'm moving towards something. Saren fell silent, but the AI's monitoring feed still flickered in the corner of his HUD, tracking every spike in his vitals. The trail led into a basin, a natural depression carved by centuries of wind. The ice there was fractured into enormous plates, each separated by deep chasms that glowed faintly from some inner light far below. The air was thicker here, carrying a low resonance he could feel in his teeth. He crouched near the edge of a fissure, scanning the depths. Down there, moving with impossible grace for their size, were more of those shadows, long jointed limbs, tails like frozen whips. They were too far to read clearly, but he felt their weight in the vibrations, a slow drumbeat that set his nerves on edge. They weren't aimless, they were circling, hurting. The surface ice groaned under his weight, and he shifted quickly to a more stable ridge. Every step forward was calculated, measured against the risk of falling into whatever waited below. The footprints ahead deepened again, scorch marks visible even through the storm's constant sweep of snow. He crouched, pressing his glove to one of the impressions. It was still warm. The creature was close. Thermal residual suggests target passed through less than 5 minutes ago. Saren reported. Then we're catching up, Cade murmured, scanning the white void ahead. Lightning forked through the clouds above, the flash turning the world into a frozen photograph. In that instant far ahead, he thought he saw the silhouette again, low to the ground, head angled back toward him. His pulse quickened. Part of him knew he should slow down, assess, plan. But another part, the part that had been starving for answers since Vraxos, urged him forward. The storm roared louder in his ears, as if trying to drown that impulse. Cade, Saren's voice returned, softer now, almost warning. If this is the same species as the Vraxos predator, you may not survive another encounter. Recommend reevaluation of. If it is, Cade interrupted. Then maybe I'll finally find out why it left me alive. He pushed onward, the fissures widening around him. Beneath the ice, the shadows followed. Above, somewhere in the white void, the hunter waited. and for the first time in years, Cade felt the fire of purpose burning hotter than the cold. The wind thinned as Cade crested a rise, revealing a jagged shadow half buried in the ice. At first it looked like another fractured ridge, but the shapes were too angular, too deliberate. The storm peeled back just enough for him to see the blackened hull, an ancient expedition craft, Earth design. Its nose canted into the ground as though it had crashed decades ago. Every panel was warped and scorched. The once white emblem of the Terran exploration fleet, barely visible beneath layers of frost. He approached slowly, boots sinking into the snow, the silence here heavier than the howling void outside. This was not just wreckage, it was a grave. The airlock door hung open at a crooked angle. Inside, his helmet light swept across frost-rimed walls and frozen control panels. The bodies came into view one by one, slumped in harnesses, collapsed in corridors, curled in fetal positions on the deck. What made his chest tighten was not the stillness, but the way they had died, their torsos torn apart from the inside. Ribs bent outward like grotesque petals. Ice had formed in the cavities where their hearts should have been. No weapon did this. It was as if something had grown inside them until their bodies burst. Saren, his voice was low, almost reluctant. Any sign of life forms in here. Negative, the AI replied. All biological activity ceased decades ago. Cause of death, unknown. Structural damage suggests internal detonation of organic mass. Cade moved deeper, past the frozen dead, until his beam landed on the aft bulkhead. There, gouged into the metal with ragged precision, were words in standard Terran. He leaned closer, recognizing the crude strokes of human fingernails on steel. It doesn't sleep. It remembers every step you take. The letters had been carved over and over. As if the writer needed him, anyone, to understand. The deck vibrated. It was subtle at first. A low tremor he could have mistaken for the wind, but it grew in strength, rattling loose frost from the ceiling. The sound followed, an impossibly deep, resonant thud that came from everywhere at once. His HUD flickered as seismic readings spiked. Cade, Saren warned, ground stability compromised. Suggest immediate extraction. The tremor became a violent jolt. Ice cracked with sharp, splintering reports. Through a ragged tear in the hull, Cade saw the snow outside sink, fracture, and explode upward in a geyser of frozen debris. A shape moved in that chaos, enormous, deliberate. A leg thick as a tree trunk punched through the ice and held. It wasn't the limb of an animal. Plates of alloy were bolted into flesh, pistons moving under armor. Muscle and machine fused so seamlessly, they might have been born together. Steam vented from joints as it shifted, each exhale freezing into glittering shards that fell in slow arcs. His breath caught. Whatever this thing was, it was not a relic of nature, it was a weapon. Saren's voice came sharp and cold in his ear. Classification: Omega-tier bioengineered entity. Function unknown. Threat probability 99.7%. Recommend immediate retreat. Omega-tier. The kind of thing built to kill fleets, not lone men. He should have listened. The logical choice, the living asterisk choice, was to turn back, find shelter, wait for the storm to pass. But the footprints he'd been tracking, the eyes in the blizzard, the memories from Vraxos, all of it was leading here. If this thing guarded the portal, then it was the key. Cade, Saren pressed, your survival odds are negligible beyond this point. He stared out at the limb, withdrawing back into the fractured ice. The vibrations faded. The storm began to reclaim the silence, and in that stillness he made his choice. Negligible, he said, is better than zero. The basin beyond the wreckage was a wound in the planet's crust, wide enough to swallow a city. Ridges of broken ice radiated outward from its center, converging on a chasm so black it seemed to drink the light. His biosense stretched out, testing the air, the ground, the depths. Nothing, not even the faint hum of the creatures he'd felt earlier. The emptiness was absolute. Signal drop, Saren reported. No detectable biological activity ahead. Which meant only one thing: it was here, holding still, waiting. Every nerve in his body knew it. He moved forward slowly, testing the ice with each step, feeling the cold seep deeper into his bones. The chasm loomed ahead, a perfect scar cut into the world. Frost clung to its rim, whispering in the wind. He paused at the edge, staring into the dark, listening for the sound he dreaded and needed at once. The quiet was complete, then faint, almost imagined, a slow, deliberate inhale from far below. The first sound was not a roar. It was the brittle, surgical crack of ice giving way, a warning too late to matter. Cade had only time to register a ripple in his biosense, a sudden surge of heat cutting through the cold. Before the wall to his right erupted, shards of frozen crystal exploded outward in a spray of lethal edges. And through the breach came a mass of motion too fast to comprehend. The thing hit the ground with a force that bent. Steel struts embedded in the ice. It moved low and coiled, its body a nightmare of corded muscle overlaid with plates of dark alloy. Joints hissed steam, hydraulic pistons flexed like tendons. Its head was a wedge of armor with those same impossible green eyes locked on him, burning with the cold patience of a predator that had waited far too long. Cade moved before thought could argue, rolling across the ice as the creature lunged. A clawed forelimb slammed down where he'd been a heartbeat earlier, splitting the ice into jagged fissures. The shockwave rattled his teeth. His boots hit traction and he sprinted, the narrow ice corridor funneling him into a deadly chase. The sound of its pursuit was a constant, claws gouging the ice, the shriek of metal scraping against stone. The thud-thud-thud of massive weight closing the gap. Cade's biosense flared wildly, giving him ghost impressions of its movement. Not sight, not sound, but a map of intent. He shifted just in time to dodge a sweeping tail blade that would have taken his legs off at the knees. It was fast, faster than anything that size should be. Each time he read its trajectory, it changed, an unnatural feint. A redirection mid-charge, as though it was inside his head, anticipating his anticipation. He ducked into a sharper turn, pressing his back to an outcropping of blue ice. The creature smashed into the wall opposite, sending shards ricocheting past his visor. He caught his breath in shallow bursts, letting his biosense stretch again. There, a weakness, a void on its left side, just behind the armored shoulder. A blind spot. Cade waited for the next pass, letting the thing commit to its line. Then pushed off into a diagonal sprint toward that opening. The ice groaned under his boots, his heart a pounding drum in his ears. He closed in 3 meters, too, when the beast twisted unnaturally, revealing a third arm. Not an arm, exactly. A segmented limb of matte black alloy unfolding from beneath its flank. Each joint ending in a claw tipped with a cutting edge. It lashed out in a horizontal arc, catching him across the chest plate and hurling him sideways into the wall. His suit alarm screamed as the impact cracked his left pauldron and sent a shock through his ribs. The breath ripped out of him, but he forced himself upright. The limb retracted with a hiss, plate sliding over the seam until it was invisible again. It had shown him the blind spot only to bait him into it. Adapting to your evasion patterns, Saren's voice snapped in his ear. It has predictive combat algorithms. This is not a wild animal. I noticed, Cade grunted, spitting copper-taste blood into his helmet's waste collector. The chase drove him deeper into the ice labyrinth. The walls narrowing, light dimming, until only his visor beam cut through the frost. The air grew warmer here, unnaturally so, the ice sweating in rivulets that froze again seconds later. The floor began to slope, leading him down into a tunnel that widened into a chamber. The first thing he noticed wasn't the size, it was the light. A golden radiance pulsed from somewhere beyond the next bend, bathing the walls in molten glow. The ice above caught the light in shimmering veins, casting the chamber in a surreal dawn. The portal, it had to be. He took a step toward it, chest heaving, the ache in his ribs barely registering now. Then the ground shuddered. The creature dropped into the chamber from above, a blur of mass and malice. Its landing cracked the floor, sending spiderweb fractures racing outward. Cade barely had time to brace before it launched itself at him, the impact smashing them both through the weakened ice. They fell together into darkness. The world became weightless chaos, ice shards spinning past. The golden light receding above, the beast's armored form twisting midair to reach for him. Cade grabbed at the walls, his gloves scraping uselessly against smooth, frozen surfaces. The impact came hard, knocking the visor display into a static haze. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing. Then, faint and impossible, came a voice. It was human, or close enough. The words were in an archaic dialect of Terran standard, vowels drawn and consonants clipped. "You are not permitted to return." Cade's eyes snapped open. The voice wasn't in his ears, it was asterisk in his head, asterisk, resonating through the bones of his skull. He sat up slowly, ignoring the protest in his ribs, scanning the darkness for the source. The beast was nowhere to be seen. His visor rebooted, flickering back to life. The chamber around him was vast, the walls a seamless blend of ice and metal. As though the glacier itself had grown around some ancient construct, patterns were etched into the alloy. Lines of script he couldn't read but felt in the pit of his stomach. Warnings, maybe, or records. "Who's there?" His own voice echoed oddly, swallowed almost instantly by the space. Silence. He pushed himself to his feet, boots crunching on frost. The golden light filtered faintly down through cracks. Above, enough to silhouette the far end of the chamber. Shapes moved there, slow, deliberate. Then the green eyes bloomed in the dark. Consciousness returned in fragments, first the cold burning his skin beneath. The suit, then the weight in his limbs, then the sound of something heavy and deliberate moving nearby. Cade's eyes opened to a blur of pale light and shifting shadows. His head throbbed, the taste of metal bitter in his mouth. He tried to move, but a hard pull locked his arms behind him. He looked down and saw the restraints, cords of pale blue. Energy, humming with a faint vibration that bit into the surface of his armor. The air smelled faintly of ozone and frost. Shapes moved at the edge of his vision. As they came closer, he realized they were not the beast, but tall, humanoid figures draped in armor sculpted from the same ice and alloy as the tunnels themselves. The suits clung to their forms in jagged plates, their faces hidden behind masks of translucent crystal. Behind the frost glass, faint lines of light pulsed where their eyes should be. One stopped before him, its height nearly a head above his own, even seated. When it spoke, the voice was layered, a resonant, almost musical echo that carried more weight than volume. "You walk in a place forbidden." Cade's mouth was dry. "You made that thing, didn't you?" Another figure stepped forward. This one's armor darker, lined with symbols cut deep into the plates. "It is not a thing. It is a guardian. It watches the gate so your kind may never pass." "Our kind?" Cade's tone was sharp, the ache in his ribs making each breath measured. The first figure tilted its head, as if surprised he needed to ask. "Humans, the destroyers, the takers. Your Earth is not lost, it is sealed. For the safety of what remains." A flicker of heat rose in Cade's chest despite the cold around him. "You sealed it, you turned it into a myth, for asterisk safety." The darker armored one leaned closer, the frost of its mask almost touching his visor. "We did what you would not. We kept the rest of creation from becoming as dead as your cradle world." The words hit him harder than the blow that had knocked him out. His biosense caught the steady, unreadable pulses of life all around him, too disciplined to betray intent. "You don't know what we've become since then," he said. "You don't know what we can do." "We know exactly what you can do," the first replied. "That is why you will leave. We will release you beyond the outer ridges. You will not return here. The gate will remain closed, and if I say no," the darker one straightened, "then you die here, and your bones will join the others beneath the ice." The air seemed to press in, the cold tightening its grip on his lungs. This was the choice. They believed themselves protectors, but to him they were wardens, and the cage was not just his. He lowered his head, closing his eyes briefly. "Then I'm not leaving." The hum of the restraints deepened, tightening for a moment as if in warning. "So be it," the darker one said. Behind them, a shadow shifted, and Cade's breath caught as the guardian stepped into the light. It was larger now. No, not larger, just freed. Segments of armored plating had been released from locking frames, revealing more of the living muscle beneath. The third mechanical limb extended fully from its side, claws flexing with surgical precision. Steam vented from its flanks in powerful bursts, each cloud crystallizing into drifting flakes. "You have one final moment," the first figure said. "Accept the exile or face the guardian unleashed." Cade's biosense flared, not for them, but for the beast. Its mind was a storm of instinct and programming, both at war, neither yielding. He could feel the rhythm of its movements before it made them, faint through the static of the cold. He opened his eyes, meeting the green glow that burned from the guardian's head. "Saren," he said quietly, "on my mark." The AI's voice came back instantly. "Acknowledged." Cade inhaled once, let the cold bite deeper, then focused on the restraints. The cords weren't just physical. They were anchored in a frequency, a pulse of energy steady and predictable. He reached into that pattern with his sense, feeling for the beat that kept it stable. When he found it, he pushed, not with his body, but with the strange resonance that had made him both an asset and a liability all his life. The cord snapped in a burst of sparks. He was moving before the pieces hit the floor. His hand seized the nearest weapon, a hooked blade carried by one of the armored figures, and spun it in a rising arc to force them back. The guardian roared, a sound like an avalanche tearing through a canyon, and the chamber erupted into chaos. It lunged, claws shattering the ice floor, its breath fogging the air in thick plumes. Cade dove sideways as one mechanical limb slammed down, the impact sending a shockwave through his bones. He rolled, came up with the blade reversed in his grip, and struck at the exposed joint of its nearest leg. Sparks and shards of alloy flew, but the guardian hardly faltered. The other figures scattered to the edges, not out of fear, but to watch. This was a trial. The portal's golden light flared behind the beast, pulsing faster now, as though the fight itself was feeding it. The air pressure shifted. The storm outside howled down through cracks in the ice above, snow whipping into the chamber. Visibility dropped to meters at best, every movement a blur of shadow and gold. Cade's biosense became his only guide. He felt the swell of muscle before the beast swung its tail and ducked under it, sliding across the ice to strike at its flank. The third arm lashed out, catching his shoulder and spinning him hard into a pillar. His visor cracked further, the AI's display flickered but held. "Vital signs critical," Saren warned. "Not yet," Cade muttered, forcing himself upright. The beast charged, its bulk a wall of death. He sidestepped at the last moment, hooking the blade into the groove between armor plates, using its own momentum to rip the seam wider. The creature bellowed, the sound vibrating through the ice. And then came the choice. The seam led deeper, straight into the junction of mechanical and living tissue, a kill point. One strike there with enough force and the guardian would collapse, the portal's power untethered, possibly destroyed in the process. Or he could leave it alive, disable it just enough to slip past into the gate, and gamble that it wouldn't recover fast enough to stop him. The storm screamed around him, the golden light flaring so bright it painted every shard of ice in molten fire. His grip tightened on the blade. Killing it would end the threat but also end the gate. Leaving it alive could mean reaching Earth, or dying before he took the third step through. His breath frosted in the air, the Guardian's eyes locked on his, for an instant beneath the programming and the rage. He thought he saw recognition. The blade hovered and Cade made his choice. Cade's grip tightened on the blade, the seam to the Guardian's core wide open before him. The storm shrieking in the chamber like the breath of some ancient god. Every survival instinct screamed for him to drive the steel home, end it now before it tore him apart. But beneath the roar of hydraulics and the pulse of its living muscle, he felt something different, a hitch in its rhythm. A hesitation in the way it held itself. It wasn't just targeting him, it was watching him. He pulled the blade back. Instead of striking the kill point, he pivoted, jamming the weapon into the joint of the third mechanical limb and twisting until the metal shrieked. Sparks burst in a spray as the servos locked. The Guardian roared and lashed out, but Cade was already moving, sliding along the slick floor toward the jagged wall, where the storm poured in through fractured ice. The wind was a weapon here, slicing in wild crosscurrents, blinding anything that relied on sight. Cade used his biosense, feeling for the beast's approach in the vibrations of the ice. It came at him fast, claws gouging deep, but each time it lunged he sidestepped, letting the gale hammer its balance. The chamber's floor tilted toward the open breach in the ice wall. If he could draw it closer, the footing would betray it. Another charge. He ducked under a sweeping claw and slammed his shoulder into its flank, forcing it into the slope. The creature's weight cracked the ice beneath it, opening a jagged sink of shattered plates. It staggered, mechanical limb flailing uselessly where he disabled it. Cade dropped the blade, ripping free the control node embedded at the top of its armored spine. Wires tore loose in a spray of frost and oil. The Guardian froze mid-motion, steam venting in violent bursts as the connection severed. Its massive chest heaved, breath rolling out in slow, uncertain waves. Above, shouts rang out, sharp, alien syllables from the Watchers. The creators had moved from the shadows, their crystalline masks flashing in the portal's golden light. One raised a weapon that hummed with energy. Cade saw the angle. They weren't aiming for him. They were going to end the Guardian now that it was vulnerable. He didn't think, he moved. The first shot cracked through the air, a beam of white-hot light cutting toward the beast. Cade threw himself into its path, but the Guardian moved faster. It shifted, putting its bulk between him and the attack. The beam striking its armor and ricocheting into the wall in a shower of molten ice. The chamber went still for half a breath. The creators hesitated, their lines broken, their perfect control fractured by what they'd just seen. Cade met their gaze through the frost and static, his voice low and steady. "It's done taking your orders." They stepped back, unreadable behind their masks. Then, with the sudden precision of retreating soldiers, they vanished into the fissures at the chamber's edge. Their voices echoed briefly in the wind, then were gone entirely. The portal loomed, golden and alive, its surface rippling like liquid metal. The storm outside pressed harder through the broken ice above, filling the air with a white fury that wrapped around them both. The Guardian stood still, head low, steam curling from its joints. Cade stepped closer. His boots crunched softly on the frost. Slowly, he lifted one hand and placed it against the cold armor of its head. The metal was slick under his palm, but beneath it, he felt the faint tremor of its breathing. The green eyes, no longer burning with the sharp light of pursuit, dimmed to a calmer hue. It let out a low, resonant sound, not a roar, not a threat, something quieter. Almost acceptance. He didn't know what it meant. Maybe it was just an animal reacting to the absence of pain. Maybe it was something more. The portal's pull was stronger now, a hum in the air calling him forward. He let his hand fall away from the guardian's head. It didn't move to stop him. Instead, it turned slightly, angling its body toward the breach in the ice, as if ready to disappear back into the world it knew. Cade gave it one last look, a nod that was more instinct than decision. Then he stepped toward the gate. The air changed immediately, the cold replaced by a weightless heat as the surface of. The portal rippled at his approach. Behind him, the guardian let out one final, quiet rumble before stepping back into the curtain of snow, its form vanishing piece by piece until only the green glow of its eyes remained in the white, and then even that was gone. Cade faced forward and stepped through. Light swallowed him, gold and blinding, filling every corner of his vision, searing through the cracks in his armor, pulling him apart and stitching him back together all in the same instant. The last thing he saw before the light took everything was the storm on Navarro's, still raging, still endless, and the faint impression of massive footprints leading away into the white. Then the ice, the wind, and the cold were gone. The light spat him out into silence. No storm, no ice, no freezing air biting at his skin. For a moment Cade thought he was deaf, until the wind whispered past his helmet, carrying with it the dry hiss of sand. He opened his eyes fully and saw what had once been a horizon dominated by life, now drowned in a haze of dust and gold. This was Earth, or what was left of it. He stood on cracked pavement that had long since surrendered to the desert, blacktop splitting into jagged islands buried under dunes. The skeletons of buildings jutted from the sand like the bones of leviathans, their glass long gone, their steel frames warped under the relentless heat. Once grand towers leaned at impossible angles, their shadows thin and useless in the washed-out light. Cade took a step forward, his boots sinking into the grit. The city here had been swallowed in layers, time erasing color and shape until only outlines remained. He could almost imagine the streets alive again, voices in a hundred tongues, the hum of traffic, the pulse of a world too busy to imagine ending. But the wind was the only voice now, and it spoke of nothing but absence. His visor flickered with environmental data, oxygen levels low but survivable, radiation trace minimal. It wasn't hostile, it was just empty. "Saren," he said quietly, "begin recording." "Acknowledged," the AI replied, its tone subdued. He moved through the ruins, the sun casting harsh lines across the broken architecture. In the shell of what might have been a civic hall, he found a standing wall of stone. Its surface bore the faint carvings of a once proud emblem, almost erased by time. Cade placed his hand on it, feeling the faint heat of the day's sun seep into his glove. This place had once been a heart, now it was a tomb. He began to speak, his voice steady despite the weight in it. "If anyone finds this, if anyone follows me through the gate, there's something you need to understand. Power isn't just in weapons, or the things we can build, or the enemies we can crush. Real power is knowing when to stop, when to let go. We weren't made to destroy, but we forgot that a long time ago." The wind surged, rattling debris in the empty streets, as though the city itself was listening. He kept walking, passing rusted vehicles half buried in dunes, storefronts collapsed under their own weight. The faint glimmer of glass scattered like stars in the sand. The ones who guard the gate think they're protecting the galaxy from us. Maybe they're right. Maybe we were the threat all along, but I've seen enough to know this. If we get another chance, we have to be something better than what we were. His boots carried him toward the tallest structure still standing. Its upper floors collapsed into a jagged crown. Inside, stairwells were choked with rubble, but he climbed them anyway, each step crunching under grit. The higher he went, the more of the dead city spread out beneath him, an ocean of stone and sand, streets erased, the coastline a faint shimmer in the distance. When he reached the roof, the wind was stronger, tugging at his armor. He could see for miles. No movement, no life, just the endless quiet of a planet that had survived its destroyers by outlasting them. He stood there for a long time, letting the view burn into his memory. Then he spoke again, his voice carrying into the recorder. If we go back, if we rebuild, it can't be like before. Not with the same greed, the same blindness. Every war we fought, every world we touched, it all brought us here. We can't fix that by repeating it. He paused, the weight of the next words settling in his chest. If you've come this far, you need to ask yourself something. If you could go back, if you could undo what was done, would you have the courage to change? The AI confirmed the message saved. He turned to look over his shoulder, toward where the portal shimmered faintly at street level, a golden wound in the air. It was dimmer now, its light fading as it prepared to close. Beyond it lay the frozen hell of Navarro's. The storm still raging, the footprints still etched into the ice. He thought of the guardian, the weight of its head. Beneath his hand, the way its eyes had softened in those last moments. A creature built for destruction that, for a heartbeat, had chosen not to kill. If that was possible, maybe there was hope for them too. Cade walked to the edge of the rooftop. The wind whipped around him, carrying grains of sand that stung against his visor. The city's ruins stretched out in all directions, a map of what needed to be remembered and what needed to be buried. The light behind him dimmed further, casting his shadow long over the rooftop. He didn't turn until the hum of the portal began to fade entirely. When he did, he saw it, the faintest flicker of green. Deep within the gold, two eyes watching. They lingered for a breath, then vanished into the closing shimmer. The wind took the rest. He stood there as the portal winked out, leaving only the howl of air through broken steel and hollow streets. The war wasn't over, it had just changed battlegrounds.